Back in 2002, an expedition through various coal mines in the city home formation of Colombia dug up hundreds upon hundreds of different thoracic vertebrae and ribs. And not only were many of them well preserved, each one was noted for being unusually large. However, the scientists that found them weren't exactly shocked or impressed, as the formation they were found in was well known for housing numerous reptilian giants, primarily kaiju-like turtles and monstrous crocs from the Paleocene. And because of this, plus the fact that certain reptiles superficially have similar vertebrae, the team simply concluded that they had stumbled upon a new crocodilian. Pretty cool, but nothing to write home about. However, only a few years later, the fossils were transported to the Florida Museum of Natural History, where by chance they were re-examined. And this re-examination led to a rather unexpected find, which was that this had have been no giant croc, but rather a super-sized snake. And when I say super-sized, I mean super-sized, as it belonged to an apparently titanic serpent. And thus they amply called this new snake the Titanoboa. And since its announcement to the world, the Titanoboa has become an icon in the world of paleontology, known by the masses and hailed as the largest, most powerful snake to have ever lived. And this boat was definitely a big 'em, as adults might have measured up to 12.88 min or 42 ft in length, maybe even 14.3 min or 47 ft, which, just to put that in perspective, is akin to the length of a fully grown sperm whale. So yeah, no thank you. And with these estimates, the Titanoboa easily dethroned the previous record holder, the Gigantophus garstini, a type of matsoi from Eocene Egypt, that I'm sure if I was to take to the streets and was to ask people what the biggest or scariest snake ever was, I'm confident that most, if not all, would claim Titanoboa, if they like paleontology, that is. And they would do so with confidence and their chest puffed out. But here's the thing. The matsoi, who had just been the new king usurped, was a family of snakes who were just as messed up as the boas. And throughout history, they cooked up some really messed up serpents besides just the Gigantophus. And recently it was discovered this family created a species of their own, which was so monstrous that it may just have the Titanoboa beat. And yet the public has barely ever heard of it. So without further ado, let me introduce you to Vasuki indicus. This absolute unit of a serpent was only described just last year in 2024. Yet the holotype specimen has actually been unearthed since 2005, when in the Indian state of Gujarat a collection of 27 pre-clacal vertebrae were found, some of which were even arranged in their would-be life positions. Ironically, though, a bit similar to the Titanoboa's case, the paleontologists who stumbled upon these bones believed they had found a new croc, not a snake, and thus the fossils didn't undergo any further review. Yet, unlike the Titanoboa, who was re-examined a few years later, this specimen had to be patient, as it wasn't until 19 years down the road that someone decided to take a second peek at the matter. And boy oh boy, were they in for a surprise. As with better technology and more attention, they realized, just like the Titanoboa, that this was no croci, but rather part of agent snake. And due to certain characteristics seen in the vertebrae, it was no doubt a type of matsoi, albeit absurd body size, a type never seen before, as it was far bigger than any known species, including the Gigantophus. Based on its post-zygopial width, the team reckoned that, at the very least, this new serpent must have been between 10.9 to 12.22 ms or 36 to 40 ft, already putting it in the top 5 largest snakes of all time and longer than any reptile today. However, based on its prezyopsial width, it was even larger than this, with that bone yielding a length of 15.2 meters or 50 ft, giving it a strong edge over its largest relative and even a slight edge over Titanoboa. And at this length, the Vasuki doesn't just become the new king of snakes, but also the longest non-doranimal to have ever lived on land. And what do you call such an imposing beast? Well, if you've been paying attention, I've said it a few times, which is the Vasuki indicus. And this might not seem to mean anything at first, but it really is a very fitting name, as Vasuki refers to the king of serpents in Hinduism, while indicus references the fact that it was discovered in India. And so naturally, the discovery of a snake possibly bigger than Titanoboa created quite a bit of buzz. But there was and still is one looming question, which is that while we have fair evidence that it was longer, We don't know for sure if Suki was heavier or lighter than the Titanoboa, given that the latter possessed more robust, wider skeleton. And as of now, the maximum weight given to Vizuki indicus is about 1.1 tons, whereas the Titanoboa may have been slightly heavier with its max estimates, being about 1.25 tons. So not a huge difference, but enough that you might start questioning if Suki really outscares the previous ruler. And to that I say you must have little faith, cause I can almost guarantee that if you had to pick one of these guys to meet in person, the safer option would almost certainly be the Titanoboa. And the "you've been lied to about Titanoboa" reason for this is that you have all been lied to. Titanoboa was no Titan slayer. See what I did there? Now, settle down, everyone. Before you guys pick up your pitchforks, let me explain. When it was first described and classified as a bode, paleontologists assumed that Titanoboa would have acted a lot like a modern anaconda, which eats just about everything they can manage to swallow or sometimes can't, with the main difference being that Titanoboas like an anaconda on megaoids and thus would have been able to tackle giant crocs, turtles, and pretty much anything else that shared its environment. And for the most part, this early hypothesis has shaped how mainstream media has portrayed the Titanoboa, in other words, as a monstrous killer. However, in recent years, after more cranial material was recovered, scientists started to notice that its skull was keyed unlike that of most boats, having an unusual palate and abnormal number of teeth, as well as the teeth themselves being suspiciously curved and shaped like hooks, fishing hooks to be exact, and therefore, the idea started to creep in that Titanoboa was all along just an oversized fisher, not a mammal killer or reptile killer. And sure enough, what scientists also discovered was that these morphologies were not like those of its relatives, but rather like those of modern-day Cyanidian snakes, specifically those who maintain a pisciferous diet. And if you need any more evidence, then take into consideration where the Titanoboa actually lived, which was warm regions where extensive rivers were found along with a wide range of fish. And remains of the snake are often associated with various lungfish and osteoglossomorphs. So in other words, it looks like the snake had a taste for sushi, not chicken, if you get my drift. Now, what Vizuki Vasuki indicus, on the other hand, probably would have been much more interested in you than your pet goldfish, with its vertebrae suggesting it to have most likely been a terrestrial snake that preferred to spend its time on the ground than in the waters or the trees, for that matter, too, with it being too heavy for the latter. Though I will say that in the case of swimming, it is believed to have been quite capable and was probably surprisingly good at it. So if giant crocs were enough to keep you out of the water, then the Vizuki will. This is besides the point, though. The bigger thing here is that these vertebrae not only reflected primarily terrestrial locomotion, but that it was also a constrictor snake, who lacked any specific adaptations that would suggest a specialization of fish, and thus is presumed to have been more of a any kind of opportunity kind of guy eating crocs, turtles, fish, other snakes, and get this, even primitive whales. So yeah, it definitely had quite the appetite. Here's the thing, though, which actually a 1-ton snake you can't see to me makes the Vizuki even scarier. If you were sent back into its realm, you wouldn't find yourself running away or being chased by this creature, as its hunkering size rendered it quite slow and immobile. So instead, you would have had to be on edge for every second you're there. Because to get around the speed issue, the Vizuki indicus evolved to be an expert ambush hunter that likely utilized camouflage to stage strikes on unsuspecting prey, which would then kill via constriction. Now, I know what you're thinking. There ain't no way I'm missing a 1-ton snake. And yes, its size would make it a bit easier to spot, but don't forget snakes are really good at hiding. Like really, really good. I mean, there's even the hypothesis that humans evolve good eyesight because of them. So yeah, good luck. Let me tell you, if you're starting to think that messing with Vizuki is a bad idea, then just wait to hear how it would eat you. Hint, hint, it's not pretty. You may know this if you've seen one of my older videos, but the group it belonged to, the Matsoi, were a fairly ancient family of snakes, which appeared about 28 million years, horrifying way of eating and hunting before the Bouds did during the late Cretaceous. And because of this old age, they were quite primitive. And one way this showed was through the construction of their jaws, which unlike those of Thebodes, lacked an extra quadrate bone and elastic tendons. That in bodes is what allows them to open their mouths to freakish angles. And so without these adaptations, the matsoid, despite being constrictors, wouldn't have been able to swallow their prey whole. Sounds good at first, but honestly, you'd prefer it. If they gulped you down because instead of swallowing, they simply resolved touse their vanoid-like teeth to tear off chunks of flesh that were bite-sized to then swallow. And getting fed on by one may have resembled what you see kettle dragons do to deers or eels to their respective prey, which is, in other words, just straight-up horrifying. Luckily for you, though, if you did happen to get caught by Vizuki, you probably wouldn't need to worry about feeling its teeth tear at your flesh, for its constrictions killed prey at lightning speed thanks to ridiculous forces. Let's take the anaconda for a second. An obviously feared predator who was scary enough to have gotten its own movie franchise and can squeeze with 90 lb per square in. Very impressive. Yet, the Vizuki indicus makes it look like a complete chump, having vertebrae that are up to 6 times wider than those of the anaconda. In other words, its squeezing was a tad bit tighter, and its strongest contractions possibly generated forces akin to that of a crocodile bite. Good luck surviving that. And besides the actual bone width, we do see that along the Vizuki skeleton, it possessed relatively high-sitting ribs, which helped form a stronger cylindrical trunk shape as well as transversely wide vertebrae and broad hamole, which is a fancy way for saying that it had a lot of large attachment areas where powerful muscles would have gone. And when you consider all of this together, you arrive at the harrowing conclusion that if this snake came back from the dead, many of us would be in trouble. This also doesn't even take into account that the Vizuki likely had great eyesight and a keen sense of smell thanks to their fork tongues, which allowed them and other snakes to collect scent particles from the air. Meaning that while animals had to be super vigilant just to spot it, it would know where you are no matter what. Suffice to say, this is one bad apple in quite the package. Albeit there is a drawback to its design because it turns out that sustaining a giant serpent of its... How did such big snakes evolve? Proportions takes a lot. It essentially requires a very specific kind of environment, and thus the Vizuki indicus was not a commonality during its existence. Rather a rarity, with fossils only being known from India, and on top of that, just from one single location, the Naradi Formation of Gujarat. Now during the Middle Eocene, India was much warmer than present, and also more isolated, still being an island that was drifting upwards. And as a result of these two factors, you got a lot of unique environments and strange evolution, which obviously led to the Vizuki, who specifically inhabited mosaic habitats such as backswamp, marshes. Here there was an abundance of other life, which in many cases was also large as well, which provided the Vizuki with the needed resources to attain its size. And thus far, it's known to have lived alongside numerous walks of life, including catfish, turtles, the animals it lived with crocodilians, as well as the early whales, Andrewsiphus and Cachetas, who are in fact so early on in the evolutionary tree, they're probably not even fully aquatic yet, and thus, snakes hunting whales on land might have been aerial possibility. Pretty trippy, huh? Along with the other known animals from this environment, paleontologists are also aware of a myriad of life that almost certainly encountered the Vizuki as well, given how close they were found near Naredi. And it seems like the entire region was chock full of primitive whales, namely Charadatus, Indoetetus, Bobietus, and Dacetus, as well as the primitive Sirenians, Protocern, Eosiren, and Eothyroides, a couple of which, by the way, may have ventured onto land too, given the presence of limbs. So those poor sea cows or land cows or sea land cows had to watch out as well. And there seems just to have been something in the area that really brought out the most snakes, with Vizuki being by no means the sole serpent around, with a variety of pythons also being known of. And specifically, we think that the pythons which lived in this environment are actually the same ones that still live there today, a testament to just how effective and efficient snakes are. And this area is starting to sound a little bit too snaky for you, then unfortunately I've got some more bad news. Because like I said, India was essentially an island at the time, so if you wanted to leave it, you'd have had to venture out to sea in order to escape. But it turns out that escaping wasn't really an option either, as guess what? Snakes were there too, and gentones at that. Namely, the Pteris venus, a marine serpent with a powerful tail fluke and a large body that was up to 5.7 mm or 19 ft long. So, sure, no doubt classing the Vizuki. but definitely big enough for me to immediately not like the thought of it. And that just drives home how crazy the Vizuki is. I mean, there's literally agent snakes swimming around in the waters like Mario 64, and yet it is not your biggest problem. And unfortunately, for the life in India, the Vizuki would remain a major threat for a very long time. Because while it did need perfect conditions in order to arise, it stuck like gum to asphalt once it appeared. How does a giant snake even disappear? And it would have been a large part of India's ecosystem for millions of years. I mean, really, how are you going to get rid of a snake that's longer than a double-decker? Well, the answer to that, my friends, is good old Mother Nature, the final boss for pretty much most species. As stated, one of the reasons why Vizuki evolved in the first place was thanks to a special wombo combo of conditions, including a bountiful ecosystem and the warm temperatures of the Eocene, which also had numerous events of intense heat spikes sprinkled throughout it. So the snakes got lucky while many other groups actually perished during these heat spells. But as you can imagine, their luck eventually ran out. And as the Eocene progressed and the Legocene approached, the world resumed a cooling shift that had been generally a global trend for some time, with worldwide carbon dioxide levels slowly lowering. And along with getting a bit chillier, the atmosphere started to get a wee bit drier as well. So here you have a giant snake that needs warmth and a wet, swampy home. And now both of these factors were getting stripped away. Suffice to say, the clock was ticking for our boy. And lo and behold, before the Eocene had ended about 33.9 million years ago, this serpent had disappeared from the fossil record, becoming just one more lost relic of time and serving as a reminder that the planet is always changing. However, while the Vizuki indicus might be gone for good, its legacy would live on for some time through its family, who did lose overall steam during the Eocene, but managed to persist in various places, including India. And their stories would continue all the way up to just 12,000 years ago, which was basically yesterday. And let me tell you, many of them, not just the indicus, were some bad cookies. So if you want to learn more about them, go check out an older video I made on them. Thanks for watching, and until next time on our channel.